Zack Abbott. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to chat with you.
Zack, I'd love to hear about your background. It's very interesting. You went from studying bacterial pneumonia in your PhD to building a product in consumer probiotics. So, what was it about the intersection of genetic engineering and consumer products that captured your interest?
Yeah, I think I could start even kind of before my PhD and kind of to how I got to this place. Because even going into my PhD, I think I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to, create solutions to problems. And so I was interested in a lot of things, but science has kind of always been one of the things that I've always had a lot of passion for. And I wasn't sure I wanted to be a scientist. In fact, growing up, I didn't even really know that what a scientist was as a job. But I was always really interested in science. I studied that, and then I was thinking about ways that I could kind of have an impact on the world. And after college, I did a variety of different kinds of jobs, and then was working as a research associate at a laboratory that was studying HIV. And I thought, like, this is a really great way to have an impact. It's like thinking about like diseases and curing disease, and it tied into my love of science. And so I was really passionate about that. And then as I was working in that job and thinking about what my future would look like, I thought, like, in order to kind of advance in this field and have the impact I want to have, I'll probably need to go and get a PhD, just kind of looking at kind of what others were doing in the space. And so that was really the decision to get a PhD, was for that. It wasn't, I knew, in fact, I told my PhD mentor, my boss, essentially during my PhD, that in kind of one of our first meetings, that I was like, look, I don't want to become a professor. I don't want to work in academia. I'm getting this PhD so I can go and work somewhere. And I still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I wasn't really anticipating being an entrepreneur. I was just sort of thinking like, oh, I'd go work for some biotech or something and develop some kind of product that people could use that would provide some benefit, would solve some kind of problem. And I was very much like anchored on disease, and she was like, great. And so I was like, I'm here to just kind of like learn and kind of like develop tools and think through problems and stuff. And she said, okay, great. So my project, as you said, it was on this bacteria called Legionella pneumophila, which causes a rare form of pneumonia, which I think is originally why it was an interesting research topic. But by the time I'd gotten to my boss's lab, it was really more around, it was a really great model for understanding how bacteria kind of work and how they kind of like turn things on and off. So my PhD project was really not studying pneumonia so much as just understanding how bacteria turn on and off different genes. And so I learned a lot about kind of how amazing bacteria are. And they're these like single cell little sensors that like operate in their environment. And for the last 3 billion years, they've become incredible at like sensing hundreds of different minute changes in their environment and then totally changing the proteins that they express in order to adapt to that. And so I thought that was really cool. And I started to get really kind of interested in leveraging bacteria sort of as a machine, like as an operating system or something where I could build a product or a solution to a problem. And as I said, when I started my PhD, it was really around thinking about disease and disease prevention. But as I learned more about bacteria, I learned that we have this like microbiome, this cohort of bacteria that live in us and on us, and they're doing all of these things to benefit our health rather than necessarily like causing disease. And so I started thinking bacteria more as like agents of good as opposed to like things I need to combat for the bad. And so then it was like really opened up the possibilities here of like what we could do with microbiology and with bacteria. And so like, could we sort of take these bacteria and program them? They're doing thousands of functions that they've been doing, they've been evolving to do for billions of years. Like, could we program them to do like one additional function or to like just sort of change the amount of a function they're already doing in a way that would be like reliably beneficial to us and human health? And so then I started thinking about it from that perspective. And so that was kind of the seed of what would become ZBiotics, was like, wow, what a great opportunity. And as I looked around, I saw that I was surprised to see that there weren't a lot of people or a lot of companies really working on this as an idea of like programming the bacteria to perform a function. It seemed really obvious. I was doing it every day in the laboratory in my PhD. So as were many other research scientists for decades, we're sort of genetically engineering bacteria to change the things that they could, the tasks that they could perform. And I thought like, wow, I can't believe nobody's productized this in any way. And so that at that point during my PhD, I really had kind of latched onto this idea of like using bacteria, and particularly safe edible probiotic bacteria, as like a delivery system for some function. I never anticipated that I would start my own company. I more thought that I would find ways, like I'm sure that there were businesses or companies already doing this and I could work on that, I could be part of that. But as I looked around, I saw that there weren't really a lot of other companies doing it, at least not in the way I'd envisioned it. A lot of were sort of developing them for maybe for drug applications, but I thought that like there was this whole like making healthy people healthier, making products for healthy people to deal with kind of like everyday problems that I thought like just seemed so obvious and so powerful. And so realizing that nobody else was really doing it, or very few others were really doing it, that like the only way I was going to get to do this thing was to build it myself. And so I think that that's where how ZBiotics got started eventually, was that I accepted that if this was going to get done and it was something I was really passionate about doing, that I was going to have to do it myself, to start myself. And so that's what I did. I tell it like as if I made the decision, but I was really just kind of like thinking about it a lot. And then actually I had a friend really push me to apply to a startup accelerator with this idea. And I sort of was like, okay, fine. I sort of twisted my arm and I did. And I ended up getting into the startup accelerator. And that was kind of the moment where I was like, okay, I guess I'm really doing this. And so that's kind of how ZBiotics got started.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is so interesting. I didn't know. It's like a bacteria API that you can build on top of, kind of a...
That's a great way to put it. It's like, yeah, you sort of have this like platform of ability to execute these functions in the same way you would build like apps or anything. And sort of like the next, like bacteria as like as an app platform kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Well, now I'm listening to you as a software builder myself. I kind of want to read the reference documentation of the bacteria API and make some API calls and build some apps on top of it myself.
Totally.
Man, like, I mean, you could power, like, because I talk to a lot of founders. So you're a technical scientist founder. I talk to a lot of founders in like wellness and supplements and skincare. A lot of them actually in the early stages of their journey, they end up meeting the scientist or the chemist, or they get introduced to somebody because they have the idea, they use somebody else's help. But the way you're describing, it's almost like it could empower like a whole new generation of founders who are not technical themselves, but they can kind of like build on top of existing capabilities with new ideas.
That's the hope, right? Like today, exactly. If you wanted to start a company that was in like the software space, like, you want to build an app or something, like you don't have to be able to do that yourself, right? You can like you just have to design it, right? And then like somebody else can build it. And I think from a biotech, I hope, and I think others in the space hope that biotechnology can get to the same level, right? Like the tools for reading and writing DNA are getting cheaper and cheaper, and there are more and more people who are kind of like able to execute this. And so the idea that a sort of like technical founder could pair with maybe like a more business-minded founder, and we could sort of develop like, these new these new apps, basically, these new like execution, these new functions with biology that could like help problems of human health. I think one of the things I was frustrated with myself personally as like a customer looking in like kind of the consumer space is I think a lot about my health and the way that I can kind of enhance my health. And so I look in the supplement space and you just find a lot of junk out there, right? And it's people who want to build things that help, and they sort of like look around and they see like, okay, well, what's on the shelf? And then they sort of like recombine those things on the shelf to try and solve a problem. But the reality is that like those things that are on the shelf have been on the shelf for decades, and if they're going to provide a value, they've already done it. And so a lot of times these new problems that we want to solve need new solutions. We need to build new ingredients. We need to invent those new ingredients. And so ZBiotics is about that. It's about inventing new ingredients that didn't exist before to specifically address the problem that you want. And so I think that that's the opportunity with biotechnology, is that we can look at the problem that we're trying to solve for human health and then say like, well, like what solution can we build to solve that? Which is what we do with other technology, right? Like we make new hardware because like, look, I need to solve this problem. I'm going to build something new. I'm not going to just like take the same piece of hardware somebody else made and repackage it and give it to you. And so I'm excited about that. And I think fundamentally that's what ZBiotics, and we're trying, like, that's what we're doing. And when we launched our first product in August of 2019, it was the world's first ever genetically engineered probiotic of any kind to go to market. And so we're excited about kind of building a whole category. We are the first, and, but I think that the bigger vision here is to sort of pave the way and lay a foundation so that like many companies and different products can be built with the same philosophy or the same technology.
So your friend encouraged you to apply to Y Combinator,
Yeah.
which I didn't know that it's the first time I'm hearing a non-software company going through it. Was that even a thing? Because how did he even know, or how did she know that non-software
Yeah.
it was interesting. What was that like?
Yeah. So when I applied, they were actively looking to bring in startups, more diverse startups, to get out of just doing software. We definitely weren't the first biotech company to go through Y Combinator. There were many that had gone before us. They were just represented like a small percentage of the batch. It was largely software companies, but like I think it had been at least 4 or 5 years since the first biotech had gone through Y Combinator. So there was definitely precedent there. It was just not a big proportion, but they were really looking to expand that because I think that they saw that there was an opportunity there. And so when I applied, and to be clear, when I first applied, they were piloting a different program called the fellowship program, which was like a smaller cohort, and like it was done all like remote. And so they only did it for like 3 batches, and then they scrapped it in favor of I think it's called Startup School now. And so I originally did that because I was really at the idea stage. And so I went through Y Combinator through their fellowship program, and that was great. It kind of got me started. But then once I actually had sort of made some headway and it was getting out of the 0 to 1 stage, we actually applied to the core YC program in winter of 2018 and did that batch. Like, so that been after we've been in business for like a year or two. And that was really when I think like we were ready to kind of make a lot of progress, and where YC could help. And that was really kind of like when things started to take off for us.
So you already had the product being sold, or were you in the research phase at the time?
So when I applied,
you were applying to Y Combinator
in 2016 for like the fellowship, I had literally just an idea on paper, and they kind of helped me like turn that idea into like a business model and like a startup and a founder deck and get out some like early investment. And I was already working in the lab to kind of build prototypes and things like that. And so that was the stage I was at when I applied in 2016. And then in 2018, at that point, 2 years under our belt, we had built a prototype and we'd been starting to productize. So we made the bacterial strain, but then of course we needed to build a product. The strain is just the ingredient, right? We needed to build a whole product around that. And so when we applied to YC, we didn't launch until 2019. So this was pre-product launch, but like we are now at kind of a bigger vision for what the business was going to look like as sort of 2 things. Like one was we were a biotech company that was inventing new ingredients that didn't exist before to solve problems. And then we were also going to be a CPG company, D2C, that was going to make products and brand those products and sell them to consumers that included the ingredients that we invented. And so it was sort of like we had this sort of like business model, and we were ready to kind of like really start to kind of like get the seed funding to make that happen. And that's kind of what we went to YC for.
Right. It's like 2 companies. One of them is the bacteria API. The other is the first product to build on the bacteria API.
Right, exactly. So yeah, like inventing the ingredients, but then building whole products. So there are companies, right, that will like build products, and they go and they go look on the shelf, like what are the ingredients that exist and how do I build this product? And so we're that company, but the ingredients that we pick off the shelf are the ones that we have invented to kind of solve the problem. And there's a lot of power in that, in making sure that both sides of that equation are speaking with each other, that the product side of the company understands what the customer needs, and then the biotech company also understands what's possible.
Yeah. So who came up with the idea that, all right, now we have a genetically engineered probiotic, and the first usage of that is going to be hangover cure?
Yeah. So when I originally sort of came up, so I had this idea exactly that we're going to genetically engineer bacteria to perform some useful function in the body. So that's like my hammer, and now I'm looking for the nail to pound in with it. And as a scientist, I had some ideas that objectively from a scientific perspective were interesting, but like were also objectively bad product ideas. And so I learned that through a lot of pitching on my own of sort of like the initial product
What are some
ideas.
of the bad ones? Tell me. Give
Well,
me a couple.
like the one that I had, so I made this list of like 20 or 30 different ideas, and the next day effects of drinking was on that list. But it was pretty far down the list, almost as like kind of like a joke, because I was just sort of like brainstorming like anything is possible ideas here, right? But the top of the list when I started pitching ZBiotics was a bacteria that could help you recover better from exposure to radiation. And so I was thinking about this in the context of like, very different, right? I was thinking about it in the context of like, well, you live, you're an astronaut, or you like are in the military and you're supposed to like dirty bombs, or like you live near a nuclear power plant and like there's a possible, disaster risk, or like really, but the most common application would be like you go and you get an X-ray or a CT scan, you're getting exposed to some level of radiation. That's not good for you. It's worth it to get the diagnosis, but like, that. And so that was kind of how I was thinking about it. But yeah, I pitch it at pitch competitions and like just, or to people, and they've just sort of like eyes would glaze over, politely nod, like maybe ask a question or two, but I could tell it's not really getting people excited. I could see this whole vision of like as you're putting it, like sort of this like whole platform, this like whole like opportunity to kind of like do any biological function on the planet. And this was just like the proof of concept. And so I remember I was like giving the pitch at this pitch competition, and I'm telling this whole story about radiation and kind of, not seeing a lot of enthusiasm in the audience. And at the end, in the last slide, I say, but we can do anything with this. This is like this incredible, opportunity to build, basically like solve any biological problem. And I listed off, like we could do X, we could do Y, we could do Z. And I said, we could even help you feel better after drinking. And I saw people in the audience like lean in. And then, afterwards, it was sort of the meet and greet, afterwards the pitch competition, which I did not win. Like several people come up to me and they're like, hey, tell me about that like hangover idea you had, and I was like, okay, I was just sort of like, just kind of trying to paint a picture here. But it became clear that people understood that problem and they were interested in it. And so that really redirected my thinking. And like, I think initially it was really like any problem under the sun, which was like almost like too big. And so then it was like, okay, like what do we really want to focus on? Like the whole idea here is to get people excited about genetically engineered probiotics. So we should focus on things that people understand and they care about and that they could really feel the benefit of. And so that's when I started to more think about kind of, because like originally, so, you'll notice that like I've sort of avoided using the word hangover. And that's because amongst many things in our early customer discovery, we found that like the word hangover means a lot of things to a lot of different people. They sort of like classify that differently based on their own experiences the next day. And what we found early on, and so one of the things when we first built this product and started going and handing out samples, me and my co-founder, we handed out over 10,000 samples over the course of like 2 years and had like conversations with, thousands of people about the product. And we saw that oftentimes there was like this misalignment of expectations and this misunderstanding of the product if you sort of like anchored it on a hangover, because it was a lot of different things to a lot of people. And so what we found was that like, in reality, there's like the product is designed to break down gut-derived acidotic, which is like an important part, but a part of the problem. And so starting to talk to people and say like, the next day effects of drinking and how you feel the next day and you're able to get more done, those things were more true to what the product did, and they were more aligned with people's expectations. And so that was part of the customer discovery as well. Because like in my early days, in the early days of the product as a scientist, I was sort of like, scientists, we are very like accurate in the way we say things, right? Like we've been trained to do that. And so not over-promising or not saying things. So I was always like really hesitant to call it a hangover thing, because I knew that a hangover is caused by like a dozen different things happening when you're drinking alcohol. And so this is only targeting part of that. And so I was always like really hesitant to even pitch that as an idea, because I'm like, well, we can't solve the whole problem, but we can make an impact. And people were like, great, an impact is great, I'll take it, And so that was kind of one of the early discovery points that we had with the product, and one that got people really excited. And then I was like, the more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, this is the way to go. Make products people understand, they care about, they can feel the benefit of, and that's the way you demonstrate that a genetically engineered probiotic can have like a huge impact on people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm stuck at this 10,000 samples business. I was doing some math in my head while listening to you. So 2 people in 2 years, 10,000 samples is like 6-7 per day or something like that.
Right.
Every day.
So obviously we didn't do it like that. We had like a lot of times, we did several different things. We like, for instance, we would go to like an event where they'd be drinking, and like, all over the Bay Area, we go to like through YC, we'd reach out and like, hey, are you having a holiday party or a company party or whatever? And they would ask to go, and then we'd hand out like 100 samples like to the people that were there. And then we'd set up like a booth and we'd like talk to them. And talk to people. So they'd come up and they'd be like, what is this? And be like, oh, and we practice pitching it very many different ways and seeing it was amazing to me to see like how skeptical people were. And in hindsight, it's obvious, but like we'd be like, "Hey, do you want this?" And they'd be like, "It's free. Like it'll help." And they're like, "What do you mean?" It was almost like the fact that it was free was almost like more of a problem. Like why are you giving it away for free? What's wrong with it? And like they wanted to. It was like highly skeptical that like this could improve them and their situation the next day. But we started to hear the same like 5 to 10 questions over and over and over again, and that was like very clear that those were the hills we had to get people over with our brand, like right out of the gate. Like so when people, because if I could have a 15-minute conversation with somebody, I could probably convince them to try the products, like no matter what. But of course, like I'm not gonna be able to have a 15-minute conversation with everybody. I'm gonna have about 3 seconds online for people to kind of like be exposed to products. So then what were the things that people really need to hear right out of the gate to get them interested enough to learn more? And those thousands of interactions that we had over the course of 2 years was kind of how we did it. And so we did a lot through like events like that. We also did a lot of experimentation where we would explain to somebody the product, they would try it, they would be super excited about it, and then they'd be like, are you gonna have an event like a wedding or like a trip or something like that? And then we give them like 30 samples to take with them and see if they could explain it to their friends, and if those friends would get excited about it. And we learned a lot about because we knew that word of mouth was going to be really important. This is a very social product, and so that was kind of how we got to 10,000 samples. It wasn't literally handing them out 6 a day or anything like that.
Yeah, that must have been such a learning experience, having so many conversations with people. Quickly, if you were to build a new type of product, do you think that it's possible to get that kind of learning without having that much face time?
I mean, I think that you could probably do it with less than 10,000, but ultimately I found that was like really essential for us. It was not only did it inform, right? So we had this ingredient that we knew was great. But then, and we'd done a lot of testing scientifically to determine that the ingredient was great, but like productizing that ingredient was the challenge. And I think the product is what the consumer engages with. And so all those conversations were really about like, what does the brand have to look like for people to believe and be excited about this product? Mm-hmm. And what does the product have to look like for people to enjoy using it, want to use it again, want to share it? Like all those things were really important questions. Like you make a good product, you make a good ingredient, you make something that works. Like that's like I think as a scientist, I naively thought in the beginning that was 95% of the problem, right? Once you solve the problem, you're good. But it turns out that if you actually look on the shelf and the products that do well, it's actually not even a requirement at all. There are products that literally do nothing that sell amazingly, right? Because they're incredibly well branded and well productized. And obviously the best of the best are the ones that actually solve a problem and actually do the thing, but then they're also incredibly well branded and productized. And so it's really important to understand how people respond to these things. I do think that you have to have a lot of conversations and there has to be an iterative process, right? We would talk to a bunch of people. Then my co-founder Stephen and I would get together and we talk about like, okay, well, what are the insights there? What did we see? What kind of questions did you answer? And like, okay, this is what we seem to be are the problems. So let's change our pitch to like address those and make, okay, we seem to be making more progress now, but now we're hitting new roadblocks. And so it was just very iterative. And then with the product itself, we went through several different form factors, kind of testing that out. And we hand out to people and we get their feedback on that. Like, oh, I don't like that. It doesn't have a taste, or I don't like the way it looks, or, and so then we designed a product that like very much addressed kind of those issues. And again, it was very iterative. And so, maybe because we were first time founders and first time kind of working through products, we did it more efficiently. But ultimately, I think the only way you develop a really, really great product is to iterate and talk to customers at every step of the way. And that's going to continue to be a thread for us, even as we've built like our second product, which we launched earlier this year. And like we're building our third and fourth products. Like it's very much like that's the process. And I don't know a better way to do it. That's how we did it,
Let's talk about productizing the ingredient that you mentioned. I'd love to learn about the process of finding the manufacturers willing to work with this novel engineered strain. You mentioned having to talk to over like 100 before finding the right partner. That sounds very intimidating.
That was really, really hard it was the thing I underestimated the most. Like I knew the branding and things like that was going to be hard, but like I really felt like, look, humans have been growing microbes in vats forever, right? Like, we make beer, we make all these, we make probiotics already. Like this should be easy. But it turned out that because I was making something new, like a lot of manufacturers were used to saying like, hey, here's our list of the things we make. And like the business is set up for what I described before. Like a new supplement company goes and picks things off the shelf and puts them into a jar. And so they go to a manufacturer and say like, what are the things you offer? And then they say, okay, I'll pick these 3 things off your list, and then I'll bag those up. And that's how the industry's set up, is to do that. Like, look, here's what we make. What do you want? And for us to say like, hey, we need you to make this new thing, they're like, whoa, we don't do that. It was like kind of like the answer we got from so many people. The fact that the bacteria we used is this really great bacteria. It's called Bacillus subtilis, and it is a common probiotic. But one of the things that makes it so great is that it's a spore former, which means it's like very resilient. It's able to like survive on the shelf for a long time. It's able to survive your stomach acid, all these things, which is great. It also means it's harder to clean out of your equipment, and so only like a certain subset of manufacturers were willing to work with that. And so then of that subset, finding one that was willing to work with a new strain that we had invented was even harder. And so we sort of like narrowing down our funnel. And then especially in the early days when our volume was going to be very low, right? Like a lot of these were set up to make literally, like millions of doses.
What kind of low volume are we talking about?
So in the early days, we were talking about like, I think like, the volume of the fermentation, I guess to give a scale, was like we needed like something between 1 and 5,000 liters. And
people say no to that, right?
Yeah, because they were looking to do like a minimum volume of like 10,000 to like 50,000 to like many of those talked to like 100,000. And it was like, so like if we did like one like 100,000 liter run, we would be set up for like 5 years of demand. It was like we couldn't do that. So and there's like this whole very long and expensive scale up process to get to that volume. And we were like, no, we just need somebody like in a pretty like, lab scale. Like we could literally have done it in like 250 to 500 liters. So we're talking like 2 orders of magnitude different here. So that was in the early days. And so we had to kind of find somebody who was willing to kind of like work at what basically is referred to as like kind of like pilot scale as like and then making that food grade and following all the protocols we needed. But like at like a pretty small scale.
Mm-hmm. How did you sell the first 100 bottles?
So the first thing we did was we did an Indiegogo campaign. And so we just wanted to, and this is before we were ready to launch, and we just wanted to test out like our messaging, our branding, and like in a way where people put down money. It's one thing to ask them, do you like it? It's another thing to say like, will you buy it? And so we did that, and we sold, I'd say what would amount to our first 100 bottles that way. We didn't ship it for another year after that, but that was kind of like our first test. And so we learned a ton essentially about what didn't work, and a little bit about what did. And then when we launched in the next year in August of 2019, we had all those learnings, and we sold initially. I mean, we were selling D2C on our website, and we had a very nice, like we worked hard to get a nice like press release and get like some good excitement that way. And we had developed like kind of like a list from the Indiegogo campaign, and then through word of mouth from that, like a nice list of people who were kind of like going to be our early adopters that were really excited about it. And so we sold to them. I handled all of our customer service for the first 2 years of the product. So like getting direct feedback from every customer about like what they thought of the product. And then that really helped us adjust kind of the value props and the things like that as we grew.
Mm-hmm. So you started DTC, then Amazon. How about retail? Are you guys in retail or no?
So we're just working on that now. So for the first, we only launched Amazon. So we've been on the market now for about 5.5 years, and we only launched Amazon about a little over a year ago. So for the first like 4 years of the product, pretty much we were exclusively D2C. And then we launched Amazon. That's been going great. But then and we've been doing one-off pilots in retail. Basically when people inbound and they're like, hey, I love this product, I want to sell it in my store. We see that if it's brand aligned, and then we say, okay, sure, let's see how it goes. And we've been doing a lot of testing to kind of see how that is and gathering that data. And so now we're doing we're basically formulating our retail strategy to launch fully into retail. Hopefully, we're targeting sort of Q1 of 2025 for that.
Mm-hmm. Zack, what marketing channels have been the most effective for customer acquisition?
I mean, from the beginning, organic word of mouth has always been the best, right? Like our product's very social, and so I think we've kind of relied on that. Like we really worked hard, and I think this goes back to productization. We really worked hard to design a product that people would be proud of sharing with friends. Like they wouldn't be embarrassed by giving that to somebody, right? So something that looked really good, something that was easy to take, and then of course something that worked, that people were really confident in the results of. And so that honestly is like, I think product is your best acquisition channel in many ways. Beyond that, more traditionally, I mean, we have, our core channels are really like social advertising, so Google, Meta, and then we've done a lot of really great work to kind of build an affiliate program. And so again, this is like weaponizing kind of word of mouth. And so finding people who have a cohort that they are influential with, and then empowering them to kind of like enable their followers to try the product and then see for themselves if they like it. And then in the last like couple of years, we've really started to grow kind of podcast advertising, which fundamentally amounts to the same thing. It's like you listen to a podcast, oftentimes because you're interested in and trust the host. And so if the host is giving an authentic endorsement of the product, then that's just really like a referral. And so that's how we've structured our podcast advertising as well. Is like as much as possible, we try to get the host to try the product and then really like the product and then be willing to kind of like share their personal experience of the product as like an authentic endorsement rather than just like kind of like an ad read, as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. For the creators in our audience listening and watching, what do you look for when you're collaborating with creators?
We look for people who have like a really authentic relationship and engaged relationship with their audience. There are creators who I think curate a lifestyle, and people follow it, and it's sort of like maybe aspirational or interesting to them. And then there are creators who the followers like identify with and say and so it's more of like sort of like a parasocial like friendship. And I think that's kind of the one we optimize for, is the one where people feel like they can trust them to kind of like say like, hey, if this is in my life, I use this in my life, and so I trust, or so the sort of follower says like, okay, I trust you, and I could try that in mine. And so that's not always easy to suss out exactly, but like those are the ones that we see perform the best, where people really kind of like trust the host and their recommendations more than just kind of follow them because they find them interesting or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Zach, so you've been at it for about 8 years now. If you were to start a new brand in any category that you could pick from scratch, what would you pick? Would you still pick the same category or something different?
Well, I mean, I think we're developing new products and new categories. And so I'm excited about, I think that there are just so many exciting opportunities. I think that the health and wellness space is wide open. It is clear that people are investing in their health. They're excited about the category. It's also clear that you ask most customers and it's a lot of trial and error and a lot of letdown. And, I think so the opportunity to create something real, for this category is humongous. And so I'm just excited. I think that there are dozens or hundreds of applications in this space that are exciting. And so I'm obsessed with the category, and I'm obsessed with kind of like what we can build here. So yeah, I think there's lots of real estate and lots of low-hanging fruit.
Zach, final two-part question. What are the two problems giving you a headache right now, and the two priorities that you're excited about for the year?
Two problems giving us a headache. I think that, as always, kind of like growing our customer acquisition in a sustainable way. There's a lot of changes happening in Google with AI, which I think present exciting opportunities, but they also, in the meantime, there's this transition kind of pain point there. And then...
You mean Google search? Or SEO perspective?
Like as an example, like Google search, kind of like with the AI generated heading at the top, that sort of bumps down like the sponsor brand kind of stuff. Right. So working on figuring that out. But I think at the end of the day, AI is an evolution, which means that it's new opportunities, new ways to engage with your audience in ways that are even better. But of course, when you build strategies around the old system, that they're outdated at that point. So the constant evolution, I think that's just one example in the current moment. But the constant evolution of these platforms means that we have to constantly evolve as well. And it's fun, it's part of the challenge, but it's also of course, like a headache as well. And then the other one, I should have just had it. Is that like so for 5 years we were a one product company, and so about a month and a half ago we launched our second product, which is called Sugar to Fiber, and so it's converts sugar from your diet into fiber directly in your gut. It's a totally different product than our first product, which I love and I think is great. It's exciting. It tells the story of these genetically engineered probiotics in such a great way, but it also is like it's a big challenge for our brand to really integrate those and explain those to the customer and why those two things exist. And they're very different products. The first product is very much an ad hoc product. You take it before you plan to drink alcohol. With our second product, it's administered like a daily. And so these are very different kind of like sales funnels and different types of kind of like value props. And so a big challenge for us right now is kind of like making sure that we do that right. And then you said the two things that I'm excited about. I guess like the same answer on the second one. I'm super excited about this expansion. This is really the realization and the actualization of my vision for the company and for the category, is like many different products that target many different things and that everybody in the world can benefit from them. So really excited about that. And then as an extension, kind of our future pipeline of products that we're developing that are targeting all kinds of things. Basically anything that you could do to make a healthy person live a healthier life, targeting problems that a modern human has to deal with, like pollution and climate change and all these interesting things. And so really excited about that. And then I'm excited about retail as well. I can't wait. Like, I think one of the big challenges for us with the first product is like getting it right when you need it. Right now you have to go online and order it. It comes like a few days later. Got to plan ahead. And so it'd be really great for you to be able to just like walk into a store and grab it right when you need it. So I'm really excited about that as well.
Zach, you had mentioned a few more products. Can you say yet, or is it still on the...
Still under wraps. We're still in the build process, and we still need to file patents, so I can't release what we're building. But like I say, generally speaking, it's like targeting problems of modern human health that like are new, that are the result of kind of modern technologies. Like even if you think about like the next day effects of drinking and alcohol. Alcohol is only something that humans have been ingesting intentionally for the last like 6,000 years. That's like in the 150,000 years of human history, that's a relatively new problem of new human technology. And so also we think of pollution in the air or like heavy metals in our drinking water and like all these things that are kind of like new problems. Like even our second product, it's like, with more processed food, we're getting less fiber, it's having an impact on our gut health and our overall health. And so how do we develop products that actually solve these problems of a modern human's kind of unique health challenges that are distinct from what we evolved to deal with 150,000 years ago?
Zack Abbott, thank you for sharing your journey with me.
Thank you. This is really fun.